dyslexia. So I'm not an expert in dyslexia, although I have got it, but I am learning a lot. And some of you might also have experience of dyslexia, or you might be able to feed in from things you've been doing with your students, which will be great, especially because there's, it's a reasonably small group. So there will be time later on as we go through the demonstration, when we start getting physical with our pens, to maybe share resources, share knowledge. So I'd really encourage that as we start moving through the session. That would be really worthwhile, I think. So yeah, I was lucky enough to win one of the Faculty Learning and Teaching Student Experience Awards. I've got that mixed up, prizes, and it was for this particular module. So I will refer to this module in some of the examples I give you, but I'm also hopefully going to demonstrate, how it could be much more broadly applied. But it's an exciting topic. It probably got your attention when you looked through the abstracts, maybe just the title. So this is a third year module. I only launched it in this academic year, and it had 103 students. Those students are predominantly from sociology, criminology, although we have, some of the law students, some of the combined honours students from different disciplines as well, some English students and so on, politics students, quite a range coming into this, which is quite interesting. And this coming year, 153 students have chosen the module, but of course a lot of them are on the waiting list. So, I know a lot of you are in disciplines where you're thinking that's a tiny amount, you might have 600 or so on a module. For others, that might be quite a lot. So again, some of the things I talk about might be able to be transferable to your discipline and your modules, some might not, but I will go through it all anyway. Hopefully you'll get something from it. This picture here is of Angels Paradise, which is a sexual entertainment venue in Liverpool city centre. It's on Cumbernauld Street, which some people probably don't know because it's a very little hidden away street in Liverpool. And it's actually closed, obviously because of the pandemic, but it's actually closed now anyway. The venue has moved. However, in normal non-COVID times, I take my students into this club. It's obviously closed to the public at that time, and we're not being voyeuristic. There aren't dancers in at the time, that would be inappropriate. But I really get them. You can see some of the students here. I do this guided walk, and they really get to confront some of the discomfort they have about these venues. And I do a 2-hour session with them. I do an hour of a guided walk, which is a teaching method I use quite a lot in normal times. I map out the city centre in terms of gendered space and sexual violence. And then for the second hour, we go inside the club, and I let them have a look around and just think about the embodiment of it, how it looks, how it feels. Is it what they expected? Does it surprise them? And then I give the lecture in the lap dancing club. And they do always get a lot from it, and it's a real feedback cycle of teaching. So it's not like I just go in and tell them it and go off. Often for weeks and weeks afterwards, even after the end of the module, people will still be giving me their reflections after they've mulled over it, and which again is really, really interesting. And you can do that with many different spaces. I've got friends who do these kind of guided walks, about austerity and poverty in the city centre, about homelessness, about migration. So there's all different, maybe in the future when the pandemic is behind us, I can do a workshop of guided walks, and that would be nice. But that's what that image is from anyway, in case anyone has wondered. Some of the things that I'd like you to look at afterwards, if you so wish, because I've given you all the slides as well, are these two particular videos on dyslexia, which I think explain it maybe a lot better, maybe a lot more concisely than I would. This one is by the charity Made by Dyslexia. And the reason I've chosen that video is it shows you the strengths of dyslexia. Often it's seen as a deficit. It's seen that, we're not very good maybe compared to many other people with phonological processing skills, short-term memory, reading and writing. Those things are true. However, a lot of industries at the moment are actively seeking dyslexics. And going forward in the recovery period of this pandemic, dyslexic thinking skills are highly sought after. Why? Because we think outside the box. We can think on our feet. We can hold a lot of different positions that are conflicting in tension and make sense of the bigger picture, which a lot of people struggle with. And I'm doing research at the moment on COVID, and I probably wasn't aware that so many other people struggled with that. I just thought that was normal because I do it. It isn't, apparently, and a lot of people can't do it. They get very tunnel vision into one particular ideology or perspective. I don't struggle like that. My brain's like 30 different tabs open all the time, and I can flick between them. So that is a really good video to kind of talk about the strengths of dyslexia, and I think that's something often educators don't do simply because it's the way we learn about it. We learn about it as a deficit. It isn't. And then this video is again a very short video from the British Dyslexia Association, again about seeing the strengths of it, and hopefully today, you'll also see some of the strengths. What is dyslexia then? Just, in case, I didn't really know what dyslexia was, and that's why I didn't realise I had it. I knew there was something, I knew I processed information differently, but I didn't know I had dyslexia. I was actually quite shocked in a way, but, it's quite good to know, obviously. The British Dyslexia Association then say, dyslexia is a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling, as you can see now. Characteristic features of dyslexia are difficulties in phonological awareness, verbal memory, and verbal processing speed. Dyslexia occurs across the range of intellectual abilities. It doesn't mean we're thick, although a lot of people think we are. It is best thought of as a continuum, not a distinct category, because, again, a lot of experts think dyslexia is an umbrella term, and there's lots of different conditions within that. And concurring difficulties may be seen in aspects of language, motor coordination, mental calculation, concentration, and personal organisation, and so on. Something that, I sort of deal with some of my dyslexic traits by humour. So there's some words I just can't pronounce, theorists and so on, and the students know. So when it comes on the screen to a certain name, I'll just point and they'll say what it is. And or some theorists I pronounce differently than I know you're meant to pronounce them, but I just say, oh, you know who I mean, that's how I say him, and everyone knows what I mean, and no one has a problem with it. But I think often, it's things like that. If someone says something, a mispronunciation, does it matter if you know what they mean? If you don't know what they mean, obviously that would be a problem, but if you do know what they mean, because often dyslexics don't want to speak aloud and certainly don't want to read text off a slide like that, because they've been made to feel stupid or ashamed in the past. I've run reading aloud groups, believe it or not, and I've often done them with people who can't read or write, which is obviously humbling again, because I worry about, I can't, what if I make a mistake there? That's really helped me, seeing how other people are trying to learn to read, full stop, as well, trying to get me to break it down more and think about how I do that. So my point here of doing this is I came to this uni actually, when I was 18, and I dropped out. But one of the things I really hated, and in school as well, was being put on the spot to read something. Never do that. Nobody needs to do that. Always give your resources before, if you can. I'm going to talk about that in a minute in terms of my micro-learning pedagogy, but just never do that. If you take away one thing today, please never put anyone on the spot to read something, because they might not be able to, or it might just completely throw them in terms of confidence. One thing I found out when being diagnosed with dyslexia is I actually have the phonological processing of an 8 or 9-year-old child, which is quite surprising, because obviously I've got my PhD and I'm a lecturer. So again, it doesn't mean we're stupid. It just means we deal with information differently. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk about, well, what do you do about that then? How can we try and remedy and help? There you go. So as a dyslexic, I'm actually really, really super organised, which is apparently quite rare for many dyslexic thinkers. But I don't understand time. Like, it took me a long time to learn to tell the time. Like, I don't understand time. So I see time. And again, I thought this was normal, but apparently it isn't. So what do I mean by that? Every day for work, I use my Outlook calendar and I block out my time, and I keep, referring back to it and trying to visualize how much time I've got available, because otherwise I can massively overcommit myself and think, because I'm quite enthusiastic, I can think I've got, all the time in the world, and then you don't have all the time in the world. So I see time. And this really, without me knowing it at the time, before I was diagnosed with dyslexia, I use these visual navigation grids on Canvas, not just because it's aesthetically, can't say that word, it's visually pleasing, although, hopefully it is, but it helps people visualize the whole module at a glance. They can see, what have we got to do in those 12 weeks? Now, you might think, well, yeah, Gemma, but we've got that in the module guide and I've listed that. And that might, that's true, of course we do. But seeing it is very different for many people, but in particular dyslexics. Also, this navigation menu, when you actually see it on Canvas, and I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards, by the way, if you want to email me about this, it does pull through to the particular week content. That's really helpful as well. So as a dyslexic, if I'm just faced with a screen full of information, I don't know where to look. And you can tell me all day long, it's just there, or it's, oh, just scroll down. I don't know. I can't do that. I really struggle with it. So, when this is on Canvas, if you click on any of these squares, these visuals, it will just pull you through. Now, also, of course, for visually impaired people, I always put a description of what the image is, and you can also make a recording to read it out loud, which again is very useful for dyslexics, but also people who are visually impaired or blind, just to try and cater for as many people as we can and really make it as inclusive as possible. Of course, that isn't always the case. So I know that for today, for example, I've used a grey background with white, which is the easiest thing for me to read. I appreciate for some people that would be harder. So that's why I give you the slides in advance in case anyone needed to download their own software to make sense of that, which is good practice. So just see what else I wanted you to know. Yeah, so one of the other points of this, and something that I fed back when I won the teaching award and went to the Alistair Pilkington event, was one of the other great things about, well, I think, how I'm running my modules is that I run them in a non-linear way, which throws some people, so I'm going to explain a bit more about that now. I don't think in a linear way. I think all over the place. I do not think in a nice ordered fashion. So that is how I've designed the module. So what do I mean by that? You can still go through the module if you want in a chronological fashion. That's absolutely fine. There's no pressure on you to suddenly adapt to think more like me. But what it does mean, so I give all of the course content at the beginning of the module. Everything is uploaded. I have a really heavy teaching load, and so if I didn't do that, I would struggle in semester. So all my modules, everything is uploaded. I appreciate, again, that might not be possible for everyone, but that's what I've got to do for me. But what this means is students, they know everything's there. And it means that once they've done week 1, which is introduction and history of sex work, and on my other modules, similar things for those modules like the background, introduction. And then in my second week, which is about the law and policy behind prostitution and sex work. Once they've done these lectures and their readings, they can then go in wherever they want in the module. Now, each week, of course, I run the seminars. So my week 4 seminar, which corresponds to the week before, will be on stripping and so on and so forth. People can carry on in that chronological order. But what I found, and I had 103 students, as I mentioned before, on the module this year, many of them jumped ahead. Or, how people binge watch Netflix. People were kind of binge watching the lectures and engaging with the readings around their own time frames. And of course, the various parts of the pandemic when we were completely locked down to when things were alleviated slightly, that as well had an impact on how students were engaging. So what do I mean by that? So we did the intro, we did the law. Some students had a real interest straight away about trafficking and migrant sex workers. So they automatically jumped ahead to this week. And then a lot of them thought, well, wow, what in week 11 we're doing about the global sex worker right movement and policing. But that they still came to the seminar for stripping, for example, But it meant that they then had this really intersectional perspective where they were saying, well, what about migrant workers? Well, how does race feed into this? And how does class impact on this? And so on and so forth. So there was what I want them to do, and what they all did do actually in the essays, and the external examiner commented on this, was there's an essay question for each of the weeks they can choose from. There's 10 essay questions relating to each of the main content. But I wanted them to show an awareness of the module as a whole as well. I didn't want them to just be able to, look at their lecture on stripping and come to that one seminar and pass the module. I wanted them to show an awareness for each and every, whichever the questions they chose, the background, how does history fit into this, the socio-historical context, what about law, what about policy? And they pulled so much of this in. So they also spoke about, the media, we 10 there, media portrayals. Most of them kind of thought about that. A lot of them thought about violence and stigma, and how that is obviously going to impact different sex workers differently. So yeah, it's just really good in terms of that. I had a couple of really good questions at the Alistair Pilkington event about this, which I'll just kind of reinforce here. Are students that choose one of the later questions, so that is the last question on the list they can choose about the global sex worker right movement, will they be disadvantaged through this approach? Absolutely not. They're much more advantaged than usual, because if they know they are really interested in choosing that essay question, they can come to all of their seminars throughout with that in mind, having already gone through my different micro-learning chunks and the readings and the different tasks, the podcasts, the short clips I give them. And then they can be asking those questions throughout the module, throughout the semester. Whereas I find often, might be different in different disciplines, often students that choose the question that comes in the last week's content, they don't really have enough time to maybe get feedback on it, to think it through, to see what other people are saying in the room. So it worked really well in terms of that, excellently. In fact, what it also meant was students felt a lot more in charge of their own learning. And obviously on Canvas, I shouldn't do this as a criminologist, but I do. We've got the panopticon way of looking at, how many hours students have spent online on the Canvas site. Some of them had spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, and my student evaluations were really, really good. I was really surprised, obviously, during the pandemic. But a comment that came up time and time again was how relieved it made them feel that everything was there. Because obviously, the pandemic, everything's up in the air, everything's so uncertain and very stressful. It was all there for them. And they said it just made them want to learn and read more and more, to the point where I did have to tell some of my students, you have got other modules as well, because some of them were getting, really into it. And we do have other modules as well, of course. But yeah, so they are the main reasons why I've used this approach. I'm just seeing if there's anything else I should really tell you. There is. But again, if anyone does want to ask anything, one of the other things that I do want to mention, and the next slide will also go into a little bit more detail about this, is I use trauma-informed teaching, because I've got counselling qualifications. I'm not a qualified counsellor, but I have got qualifications in that. So I'm really aware that a lot of the things I teach about, sex industry, I teach about violence, I teach about gender, I teach about, rape culture, they can be really traumatic for people. And I don't know the experience of anyone in my teaching room or anyone in the room today. So I'm always really aware of that. And this kind of design means students can think, that this week might be a problem for them when we're talking about violence, for example. And they can, if they wish, skip that content and still reach all the learning outcomes for the module and still pass with flying colours, but they're aware that that's coming up. And I always put trigger warnings as well. So in week 6, I give a trigger warning, because again, I do talk in one of my lecture chunks for that week about violence against migrants, and how that's part of a really anti-immigration hostile environment that we have in the UK. But they're aware of that, they're pre-warned, and that is obviously going to help people in terms of managing their triggers and what might be traumatic for them. I've also got 2 articles about this in Times Higher Education, one about microlearning dyslexia and one about teaching sensitive topics. So you can also click on those. But in terms of the trauma-informed teaching, it's so that we don't re-traumatise people. But what Professor Maggie O'Neill has said, and I think is really relevant in terms of dyslexia and also, teaching trauma content that could relate to trauma. Professor Maggie O'Neill argues for the need of a slower academy and how it's beneficial for students. And I argue that online or hybrid ways of learning change the pace at which learners engage. Some weeks may be heavier in hours than others, depending on how they're choosing to engage with the content. And that means that students can slow down when they encounter traumatic material. And I think we need to reclaim the slowing of pace, and the benefits of reflective practice. And obviously in the Accelerated Neoliberal Academy, stopping to pause and reflect is a radical act. Just to quickly go back to that, one of the examples I give is it's like pieces of a board game moving around in different directions at different paces. So they might be moving really fast between some and then slow and pause because they've left themselves the time to do that. And that's really important as well in terms of students feeling they've got control of the pace and direction of which they learn. So different ways of engaging to feeding into seminar discussions, and some of these can be difficult when you've got dyslexia because you're trying to manage many different things. And we're going to do some of these in a minute. I'm going to get you to do them after the next slide. Some people reflected and emailed me content because they didn't feel maybe confident in front of everybody, or they just had a really good reflection they wanted to share. The chat box, of course, discussion boards on my Canvas page, which then other students give back student feedback on, and quite a debate, a respectful but debate might start, and people are sharing links with each other before they come to the seminar. Also encouraging students to record voice notes. People, I know why, it's not for some reason, it's because we teach people that reading and writing are superior. Are they? It really depends what industry we're in. I run quite a popular blog, for example, and in a lot of industries, they want you to be able to disseminate widely and for a lay audience, so that's a really good skill. But yeah, being so for me, I'm not the best at reading and writing. My co-authors will tell you that my writing's a bit of a mess, but I'm really good with ideas, and I'm hopefully really good at talking to audiences. I do prefer in real life, but so encouraging people, if they're not as confident with their reading or writing, record their notes, record their ideas, that's okay, and then bring them to the seminar. We can listen. If maybe, as well for students with anxiety or a range of other conditions, they might have great ideas, have done all the work, and then when it comes to the crunch, they get really anxious. So that's a way of dealing with that as well. I use a lot of photo elicitation as well. I use photo voice as a research method, but I use photo elicitation in the classroom. I get students to bring photos or media pieces or different examples, and in that guided walk, that if I go all the way back to my first slide, when we do that walk, slide 2, again, that's on a walk that was funded by FACT in Liverpool, the Foundation for Art and Creative Technology, because I've been funded by quite a few art organisations to do this. I get people to go around and take photos of the city, so afterwards we can discuss it and have they seen the city differently through using that gaze of the camera rather than just their own eyes or their own ears or their own sensory. So I get people to use photos. And I listened actually to the Academy podcast the other day that featured Dr. Ruth Pilkington. I found it very useful indeed. Ruth was talking about using reflection to support the enhancement of learning and teaching. And I really recommend that. And it's just about having these, many options to support students for EDI reasons. Today I'm talking about dyslexia, but it will be helpful to many students, in fact, if not all students, if we start talking about more inclusive practice. So I appreciate this is very small, and I apologise for that if people aren't able to zoom in on this screen. It's to give you an idea just of how it looks. These are 2 visuals that we use on the module. They're actually by the artist Tamara Jade. who has given permission for me to use them today. If people want to commission artists to do things, if you're not confident in doing it yourself, you can commission such people. Tamara Jade made these for a sex work organisation and outreach charity, a grassroots, a sex worker-led organisation. And it's a way of breaking down really complex ideas about the Nordic model. So criminalising the bias of sex, it's meant to not criminalise the sex worker, although it actually does in practice. But it's a way of thinking about these really complex ideas and breaking them down, so that if you shared that on a blog or on Twitter or a wider audience, people can really connect with what you're saying. In terms of teaching, and this is what we're going to play around with in a moment, it's really useful to start to break down what you're doing and thinking about why. Because often we're so busy, we just do what we do and it seems to work and the students are retaining, and we're all very time limited, I appreciate. But what I'd like us to do now, if you've got your pens and you should be prepared, is just play around. Obviously, this would work better in person, I appreciate. But if we just spend the next 10 minutes thinking about what we do, choose a module you teach on. Hopefully you might lead it, you might just be teaching on it in a different capacity. But I want us to think about how would you, if you had to summarise either your pedagogy or, one of the lectures for that week, key things, what are we doing and why? And I use mapping like this in the classroom, so in seminar space. I have tried to do it online as well, and it does work, but I do prefer it in the classroom. But hopefully you have all got your pens. Can we just sort of, I'll do it as we speak, but start to think about, can we map out our teaching, how we're teaching our modules, and what things are we considering in terms of inclusive practice, in terms of maybe things that have gone well during the pandemic, maybe things that haven't. That's okay, that's happened for all of us, but it does help to draw it out. I appreciate not everybody, for different EDI reasons, might not be able to do this, but if that's the case, you could record it. But yeah, hopefully you all do want to do this, otherwise it's just me drawing alone. But and does anyone want to unmute themselves at this point as well, as we're, because I'm going to be drawing at the same time. And does anyone want to say anything about any of this? Give me some, so it's not just me staring at myself. Has anyone used these kind of mapping ways of mapping, these mapping tools, I should say, before?
I think in CIE we're quite interested in visual communication as well, Gemma, and I'm not very kind of artistic, but aren't there kind of some very good infographic apps as such? PictoChart, for instance, is one that I know about, kind of, and I've also used like cartoon kind of Powtoon kind of to make visual kind of representations, and I found the process of trying to take something theoretical and make it visual really creative, really tough in some ways, but kind of really creative and really effective. So I'm going to enjoy giving it a go, but it's not going to look very nice. That's all I can say.
It's okay if it doesn't look nice, but definitely it's that process of taking something theoretical, this visual is making it look like this is, tiny and nothing. This is a huge body of work, that people spend their whole careers looking at this and criminalising the bio of sex. So yeah, that process of breaking it down, and when you do it in a classroom as well, and people are sharing their ideas and looking how other people are doing it differently, and then thinking, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So for example, in terms of this, for anyone who can't, I appreciate the writing's really small. So this is how sex workers think about the Nordic model in practice. So it's meant to be decriminalising the buyer of sex, but not the sex worker. And this is sex workers talking about how this works in practice in France, when the law was introduced in 2016, Sweden in 1999, that's where it originates from, the Nordic model, the Swedish model, Ireland in 2017, and Norway in 2009. So often people will, I've been involved in sex work for nearly 20 years, and a lot of my opponents, let's say, because I believe in the decriminalisation of sex work, will say we shouldn't do that, because of various reasons. And this is really breaking down actually how this law works in process, in practical terms, lived experience. So a lot of the sex workers often pick up on things like this: Operation Homeless, which is where the government have told landlords in the Nordic regions, in Norway and Sweden, in fact, that if they find out one of their tenants is a sex worker, they have to make them homeless. Because if they don't, they could be charged with a brothel keeping offence, or helping sex workers to sell sex offence. So that's a huge thing that people are often aware of. Then when they see that on such a visual, they look it up, and it really changes the game, because they're like, whoa, I thought this was meant to protect sex workers, and that's making them more vulnerable. And then they find out that this is actually very raced. So a lot of the sex workers who were targeted in Norway and Sweden are black sex workers, or other sex workers of colour, or the migrant sex workers. So then we start thinking, wow, the law is not applied equally. Why are these people being targeted? And then we find out that actually this is a cover for quite a hostile anti-immigration policy. It starts really breaking down these ideas and challenging people. And it's just, if you can zoom in later on perhaps a different screen than you're on now, it really is quite shocking when it breaks it down if you're not aware of this. But of course, this can work for any kind of idea. It's very, very transferable. So I'm speaking. I should be drawing here. This is the problem when I'm trying to do two things at once. Does anyone else think this kind of mapping would work on a different module and a completely different discipline than I'm in? Because I'm in criminology. Has anyone got any thoughts on this? Have you done anything like this before? One of the other reasons we do this is I encourage students, if they feel comfortable, they don't have to, if they do something like this, if they would like to share it on their private social media, if they've got it, or on a Twitter account, or on a blog, or if they want me to put it out on Twitter, and then we use a popular hashtag surrounding sex work and sex work policy, and we get feedback from random people on Twitter who are using that hashtag. And that's really interesting as well, because then we're connecting with people at all of the universities, practitioners, sex workers, and from all over the world, who are also saying, yes, but have you thought about this? Yes, but you haven't read this. And that's amazing, because we're then getting that whole body of work. So I'm part of the Sex Work Research Hub, which is 280 sex work academics and practitioners around the globe. But there's all different networks like that. And when they see a hashtag, they'll often join in. And it's really, really good, because students then say, this isn't just me in a room telling them this and that. This is real. And this has real implications for people. Because one of the things on the module, it's not a learning outcome as such, but it's one of the skills I want them to develop, is to be able to not only engage with academic texts, journal articles, books, and so forth. I also want them to look at lived experience. That is something that's really important. So blogs by sex workers or by practitioners, videos and things. Yes, I do. So Professor Tila Sanders was my external examiner, and I'm an editor of a book series of Tila, and we're working together at the moment. So yeah, I love Tila. If she watches this at any point, I don't know why she would, so it's on record. So yes, yeah, so Kate, brilliant. You're saying you encourage your students to map their findings in qual analysis. Definitely. So when I did my PhD in Leeds, Leeds Beckett, I did it in criminology in a psychology department. So I taught a lot of the advanced research methods, because a lot of psychologists seem to be, some of you might be psychologists, a lot, do quant and maybe not qual. So yeah, we did mapping a lot there as well. Oh, brilliant, you did your PhD at Leeds. See, it's a small world. I was just up the hill. Well, no, I was before you got to your campus at Leeds Beckett. And Joanna, you're saying that Canva. Yeah, I really like Canva. It's a lovely web app for those who want naturals. Definitely, I use Canva all the time for making like event posters and things like that. Yeah, it's really good because it's free and it has some really nice, clear visuals that are really, really effective. Yeah. 5 minutes left. That's a question for you, Joanna. I used the free one, but there might be we might have access, I don't know. So there's 5 minutes left, and I've been talking too much to really be inviting, which is typical of me. Timekeeping is not a very good dyslexic thing. Has anyone got anything you want to share with us?
I would show you my sketch.
Brilliant, thank you.
If anyone else wants to go first, though, I don't know. Okay, go on. Right. So I have to map stuff out, but I'm not very good at drawing. So
that's okay.
So here, it's blurry.
There you go.
Let me screen blurring thing off. Hold on.
Did you find it useful though? That's the thing.
I do like it. This is something I do a lot. Okay, but I don't really have the confidence to share it. What I've tried to do. Oh, yikes. Hold on. It's because of. Let me find. Sorry, you've got 5 minutes left, and I'm just.
It's okay. But I think this is the point that we don't all have to be great artists. I'm not a great artist, but it's about us breaking the information down and being able to share it with others.
Yeah, it is helpful. I mean, this is some concerns I've got about a second year lab that I teach, and the fact that the students come in and they've got this very kind of like regimented expectation. They start off on these rails here, and they're quite happy on the rails, and the lab is kind of designed to take them off the rails, and they come out sometimes very unhappy. So, yeah, I think that kind of like doodling is a good way to explore these ideas and then come up with solutions and identify what the actual problem is.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's a great way. Like, often some students come into the module with very particular ideas about sex work, which is understandable. It's very emotive. So this really helps them play around with those ideas as well, particularly when we're, in person. I've used it a lot in the past, and you can literally use like post-it notes or postcards, that kind of thing, and map things out and play around like a sort of like a jigsaw puzzle almost, and get them to see how things could look differently. Then they can take photos of that. So it is, I find it really, really useful for thinking about why we do things, but to get students to try and see what they found as well. Often, students do all the reading and they engage well, but then they think they're still not seeing the final picture, or they're worried that they're missing something. So it gives them confidence of, look how much you've done to be able to make this visual, to have all that reading and have done all that work. And again, it gives them that constant loop of feedback and that I mentioned earlier, if they do share it with other people, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of Twitter. I know not everybody is, but obviously it can be a really hostile place. But for things like this, if you're using quite a safe hashtag, with people that are using it and are going to feed in, it might be different for a lab. I appreciate, like, you might have to set your own hashtag up and things.
Gemma, I just had a really, really quick question. I know, sorry, we've probably run out of time, but I thought the navigation grid was a really excellent idea. And the way we've presented our modules on Canvas is we sort of release the new material week by week. So it's really good food for thought about making it all available straight away. But I just wondered, was there any sort of danger of your students kind of doing all the binge watching or reading at the start and then running out of steam later on in the module, or did you not find that?
So I think that's something I was worried about, maybe. I appreciate it was during, lockdown, so they were literally a captive audience.
Yeah.
But, so I can't just blow my own trumpet there. They had nothing else to do. But I had so I teach this, I was teaching this, I had 5 different seminar groups because it was 103 students. So like 20 or 20 plus in each. I had a full class for every class, nearly. Like I had like 18, 19, 20 students in every seminar. And they said it energized them because people were coming with things they hadn't gone on to yet. Yeah. And, saying, this reading's really good and it fits in with what you just said, blah, blah, blah. So they were all writing notes and they were all sharing their references and in the chat box. And they were all putting all their references and, saying which ones they recommended and summarising it as well for the students. So students were then cut and pasting that onto a document their end. So yeah, how it will work after the pandemic, I hope it
Yeah.
works the same. I had a learner plan when I was in university for a different health reason. So I always had to have things in advance. And I just think it does work to make it in advance for everyone. But we will see. But yeah, I appreciate it. They might, run out of steam. But I have found it's allowed students to work around their health and their paid work. If parents have been off or they've been self-isolating and sharing Wi-Fi, a lot of those digital inequalities as well, because sometimes they have the resources to engage more than other times. And a lot of students in shared student houses found that, if everyone was at home, the Wi-Fi was playing up, so it gave them the flexibility to account for that around other people's schedules as well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's some really good ideas there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank Gemma so much for such an interesting session. There are so many things you do there that are really kind of exciting, Gemma, and your award was so well deserved. I think you've given us an awful lot of food for thought to take away. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for participating and doodling and kind of coming up and sharing your ideas. I'm just very grateful. So I think it's time to break for lunch with all those lovely ideas to take away with us in our head. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.